Story 1. My old workplace ran a Secret Santa the week before Christmas. It had a $10 limit, and the person I was buying for I did not know very well. I left my shopping to the last minute because I did not know what to get her. While I was in town, walking past some shops, I saw an old copy of Oliver Twist in the window of the secondhand bookshop. Called to me, so I went in and picked it up. I checked the first page for the price, and it was $10. Perfect. On the day of the Secret Santa, we were all opening our gifts, about 150 people. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw people crowding around a woman who was crying. People called for the person who had been her Santa. I went over and revealed that it was me. The woman hugged me and said that 10 years earlier her house had burned down along with all her possessions. The book I had bought was her favorite and the exact same edition, the same cover she remembered. Because it was secondhand, it was even weathered in the same places she remembered. So it was as if I had taken the book from her shelf before the fire and delivered it to her 10 years later. Story 2. Here in my little town in northwest England, there is a good kebab shop where my friends and I have ordered for years. We have been in there after countless nights out and have had them deliver to our doors, so we know the people who work there pretty well. They are mostly Turkish. Once a few of us went to Turkey for a short break. Having got off the plane, we waited in the car park outside for another friend who had been on a different flight. As we stood, soaking in the ambience of a new country, the tall man from our local kebab shop walked across the road right in front of us, 2,000 miles from home. That was weird. Story 3. Seeing Paul McCartney of the Beatles on television in 2001, I noticed he was tall. The next day, walking down a very quiet street, a very tall man approached me, and it was Paul McCartney. He must have seen my expression, so he veered toward me, stuck out his hand and said, "Hello, mate." I was shocked. 18 years later, I am still shocked. I am 6 feet 1 inch. He is 5 feet 11 inches. Maybe he was just lanky. He did not just stick his hand out. He shook my hand and then briskly walked away. It was a very brief encounter, but an important one for me. I would not blame anyone for doubting me. It is a strange story. Story 4. I used to take 2 buses home from work. I got off the first one and, without realizing it, left my phone and keys on the front seat. I got on the second bus and sat in my usual front seat. My possessions that I did not know were missing were there. The bus had changed driver and route. Still freaks me out to this day. Story 5. Nobody believed me when I told this story, but one day my husband and I ran into the same couple in 3 different places in 2 different states. We had an errand out of state. We left early and stopped for breakfast. The couple was sitting across from us. The woman was wearing a funky shirt, which is why she stuck in my mind. After breakfast, we drove to the office where we had an appointment in the next state. While we were waiting in the lobby, the couple from the breakfast place walked in. We spent the day finishing our errands and then drove home. I did not feel like cooking, so we stopped for dinner at the pub. We sat down, and guess who was already eating at the table behind us? The same couple. Story 6. I was in St. Augustine on vacation. On the way there, I happened to think about a girl I knew in college in Orlando. I wondered what she was up to. As it turned out, I ran into her in a bar the first night. She was there celebrating her graduation from physician assistant school. Story 7. My friend and I took some acid one night and were tripping hard. We decided to walk to a gas station to get cigarettes. We walked past a car lot in the small town I am from, and all the cars in the lot were police cars. We walked ramrod straight to the store, quietly bought what we needed, and took a back street to his place. We stared at each other for an hour and did not speak after we got there. It turned out the city had bought a whole new fleet of police cars, and they had all been delivered there for that night. Story 8. I was sitting in a restaurant about 200 miles from where I live, telling my mother, who was visiting from another country, about a trip I had to a country about 6,000 miles away with a work colleague, when the woman at the table next to us leaned over and said that she thought I was talking about her son. It turned out I had been sitting next to the parents of my colleague while showing my mother pictures of our trip. Story 9. In grade 10 English class, the teacher did not have anything planned and, because it was near the end of the year, she went to the large cupboard in the corner and pulled out a stack of copies. They were examples of successful essays written during final exams to show what a good essay looks like and how to structure a narrative. The topic was, what was the most pivotal moment of your life? There were 3 examples ranging in proficiency. We read the first 2, and I volunteered to read the last one aloud. I started reading and stopped. The essay was about me. My older sister had received a very good mark 6 years earlier on her final exam essay, which she had written about the day I was born. I became emotional. Story 10. I worked half a day. I drove 6 hours from Southern California to Northern California to go car camping with my wife. We chose an obscure campground that was nearly deserted since it was the off-season. We picked the most remote campsite because we planned to sleep in the tent. We were bummed after setting up camp when another couple selected a site right next to us. It turned out to be a coworker I had spoken with earlier that day. I had not told the coworker anything about our plans. We were not close. Earlier that day, we had spoken briefly about a work-related issue. Story 11. My wife and I were in Tucson visiting my mother, who had just moved there. My wife wanted a tamale, so we drove around for 2 hours, stopping at restaurants, but we couldn't find one. We went back to my mother's apartment, and 2 minutes later someone knocked on the door and asked if anyone wanted to buy tamales. Story 12. One year I got a roommate through Craigslist. The guy was weird, but good-natured and paid rent. After about 2 months of living with him, my cousin came over to hang out. I introduced them, and my cousin said casually, "Nah, man, we know each other." It turned out they had been college roommates 5 years earlier in another state. Story 13. Not about me, but a pretty interesting family story. 2 of my great-grandfathers were imprisoned in the same jail and served time together. The great-grandfather on my mother's side was an architect who even designed the house of the other great-grandfather. Story 14. My sister Emily was on a ski lift in New Mexico when a younger girl sitting across from her asked if her name was Emily. Apparently the girl, who looked similar but was underage, had found my sister's lost identification the year before and had been using it for a year to buy alcohol. After the story spread, I texted my sister and she reminded me that it was even stranger. Later she was hiking with friends for 17 hours. They became tired, stuck out their thumbs to hitch a ride, and were picked up by the girl's twin. Story 15. I moved from my small hometown halfway across the country to a small city where I knew absolutely no one. At the first party I attended in the new city, I started chatting with a man. Turned out he had also just left my hometown. Story 16. I met a Canadian man while on holiday in South America, and we ended up going sightseeing together. At the end of the day, a person behind us tapped him on the shoulder and asked if the scar behind his ear was from cancer surgery. It turned out they were from the same small town in Canada, had the same type of brain cancer, and had been operated on by the same surgeon. Story 17. I was at the dentist getting a crown extension. The dentist said, "Hey, you were born on July 13th. So was I." I replied, "Me too." We shared a look of surprise and longing. Then they drilled very aggressively into my teeth. Oh God. It is happening again. Story 18. I had a kidney transplant last year. A nurse commented that the kidney had my name on it. He elaborated that the donor had the same surname as mine. Story 19. An officer from another police department was showing me a picture of a man they wanted to arrest in a different part of town. As I looked up from the computer, I saw the man riding by on a bike, literally 5 feet from the squad car. Story 20. 2 years ago, I was in Tokyo on holiday. I looked on Instagram and saw that an old friend had posted a story showing that he was also in Tokyo. We had not spoken in a few years, but I sent him a message to say we were in the same city. Not even 5 minutes later, we walked into a bar and he was standing there. This past November, I was in Toronto on business. After dinner, we went to a pub downtown. The first person I saw when I walked in was the same friend from Tokyo. We both live in Winnipeg. Story 21. I told this story elsewhere, but I will tell it again. I was at a convention. Only a few people were in the room. My friend and I wanted an autograph from a voice actor. The voice actor started singing in character. 2 men were standing next to me. One took out a video camera to record it. Years later, my husband and I were talking with friends, and the convention came up. The man with the video camera turned out to be my husband. I had also taken a picture later that day of the crowd, and he is in that picture. I had stood next to my husband years before I met him. Thank you to everyone who shared their stories. It is amazing how our lives can intersect. And a big thank you to the Reddit user who gave me the silver award. Story 22. I have an uncommon last name and a not too common first name. I was in the hospital for surgery, and the person in the next room was there for the same operation. It turned out we were second cousins and had never known the other existed. He had the same name as I do, and his wife had the same name as my wife. Story 23. I had several small world experiences, but the biggest was talking to a classmate after my first university class and discovering, during a 2-hour conversation, that our grandmothers had been each other's maid of honor and that my aunt and her mother had been best friends since childhood. Story 24. Back in the early to mid-1990s, the telephone system changed and you no longer needed to dial the area code for a long-distance in-state call. It was a small state with a single area code. One morning, I woke to the phone ringing. When I picked up, I recognized the voice as my former boss from a few years earlier. She had an unmistakable voice. We had a pleasant conversation for a while before she realized she had dialed the wrong number. I lived in a different town in another part of the state, but the number she dialed differed by only one digit. As an added coincidence, I had overslept and would have been late for work if she had not called and woken me. Story 25. Both my grandfathers were named William, and both my grandmothers were named Joyce. Story 26. I started dating a woman a few weeks ago. We began talking about where we live, and she lives not just in the same building but in the exact apartment I lived in 2 years ago. It felt so bizarre to walk into my old apartment, which I never thought I would see again. What are the odds? Story 27. The person who sits next to me at work copies everything I do, though she has no way of knowing. She wears the same clothes and brings the same lunch as I do. It is so strange I almost hate her. Story 28. When I was 18, I lived in a town far from where I eventually moved. I struck up a friendship with a man from work there. We played Halo, watched movies, etc. And he was wonderful. I moved suddenly because of a family emergency and never got his contact information. I did not even remember his name a decade later, but I thought of him often. 11 years later, I was working at my job and carpooling with someone from my training class. One night he asked if I minded his roommate being in the car, since his roommate planned to use the car after work. He introduced us. I turned around and saw the man from that distant town in the back seat. We reconnected immediately and now live together. He is my best friend and the godfather of my children. Story 29. When I was a kid, around 13, I played a lot of a video game called Diablo 2. I started a clan with a few people I had met on the internet and we played every day. At some point we were helping a random person and he asked to join. We thought he was nice enough, so we let him in. As part of the clan, we had a shared account that we used to store game items for each other. After about a month of playing, this new player went in, changed the password, stole the account, and defriended everyone. He completely disappeared with all of our stuff. Fast forward a year and my family moved to Texas. It was my first day at school. I was sitting in algebra class talking to the person in the seat next to me, and he mentioned he played Diablo. I said that I played too and that I ran a clan. I asked his username and it was him. 2,000 miles away from where I had first met this person online, he was sitting next to me in mathematics class. When I told him my username, his face went into total shock. He did not know how to respond. It was awkward. I told him I did not care and that I was over it, but we did not become friends. Story 30. When I was 1 year old, we moved to a city about 500 kilometers from where I was born. 15 years later, my father put me in a boarding school in the area of that first city because he had gone there too. I was randomly placed in a room with 2 other students. One of them is still my best friend today. When I first visited that friend at his home, I discovered that he not only lives in the same city we did, which is not much of a coincidence since it is the only major city in the area, but in the same house. Of course, I could not remember our old house, So I called my father to confirm that it was the same address. And it turned out he had briefly known my friend's family from selling the house. Edit. I hate you, and today I think I am totally right about that. Story 31. Last summer, I went to New York with my family for a week. A friend I had not seen since she graduated from college was living in New York at the time, so we met for drinks. As we were walking through Times Square at 11 in the evening on a Saturday, we saw another friend from college on the other side of the street. I knew he had been living in New Jersey, but he was in New York for a Grindr date. The three of us went to a bar and talked about life and how none of our friends live in Ireland anymore. They had all moved abroad. It was bittersweet and an incredible coincidence that three friends from a small university in Dublin had serendipitously met in New York City. Story 32. I went to college and met a cute girl. Where did you go to high school? She asked. You have never heard of it, I replied. I grew up in a town of 1,200 people and graduated in a class of about 90. Try me, she said. That was the beginning of discovering that not only had she heard of it, she had almost attended it because her family had lived in one of the neighboring towns briefly when she was growing up. We shared dozens of mutual friends and had apparently spent our young lives narrowly missing each other. Later, after we started dating, we learned that one of our mutual friends had been trying to set us up for years. She was overwhelmed with laughter when she saw that we were finally together, completely without her involvement. I asked her to marry me and she said yes. We went out to dinner with our parents so they could finally meet. Her folks arrived at the restaurant and saw mine. Her mother said, "Oh hey, my dad's name. So this is your son." Huh? They had been co-workers years ago. We have been married for 11 years now. We have a good thing going and we intend to keep it. I'm so glad you all enjoyed this. I love talking about my wife and have many wholesome stories like this. We do well because we each feel like we are the lucky one. Enjoy your day. By request of several commenters, I am adding one of my favorite stories of my wife and me in a comment below. It is a much cuter story. Please enjoy. Story 33. When I was a kid hiking with my dad, I was babbling and said our teacher warned that if you speak too much, a fly will get in your mouth. At that exact moment, a fly flew into my mouth. Story 34. I had recently moved to a new city and got a new local phone number. I had to call many utilities and other services to get everything set up. I called one company and was speaking with a customer service representative. Everything was fine until she asked for my phone number. When I told her, she became very upset. She asked, "Who are you? How did you find me? How do you know that phone number?" We eventually calmed her down enough to figure out what was happening. It turned out she had been in an abusive relationship where her ex had stalked and harassed her, including him and his friends making threatening calls constantly. She had moved to a different part of the city and taken a new, unlisted phone number. My new phone number was her old one, and the moment I said it, she assumed he had tracked her down and that the harassment would begin again. I am not sure she fully believed my explanation, but we eventually completed the call. Story 35. When my best friend and I were around 16 years old, we both had a bunch of coins we were taking to Coinstar at Kroger. We had the exact same total in coins to the penny. Story 36. My best friend in high school had the same locker combination as I did at a school of 1,200 students. I saw his combination written on a piece of paper and asked why he had written down mine. He looked confused and said that was his combination. The combination locks were changed and reassigned each year. I miss you, buddy. Story 37. I do not know if this counts as a coincidence. It might be influenced by the things we have in common. I was reading one of my dad's old journals and discovered that he and I share the same recurring nightmare. The details are almost identical, even down to how often it happens. Once a month. It is very strange. Edit. Just to answer some frequently asked questions. As far as I can remember, I never discussed this with my dad. I felt okay reading his journal because he had been dead for quite a while. He died before his time, and his death had nothing in common with the details of the dream. It was suicide. I have detailed the dream itself below. Story 38. This happened to my mother about 10 years ago. When she was about 13, She lived on Midway Island with my grandparents because my grandfather was an officer in the United States Navy. She had a water skiing accident, slamming her face into the seawall because she did not let go of the tow rope in time, leaving a scar on her forehead that she covered with her bangs. Fast forward 45 years. She was working at a retirement facility coordinating outings for residents. A new resident was talking about his life. He said he had served in the Navy and had been stationed on Midway Island in the 1960s. He said he had hated it because the only interesting thing that ever happened was when an officer's daughter did not let go of the rope in time while water skiing, slammed into the seawall, and cracked her head open, and he had to save her. My mother was shocked, pulled her bangs to the side to show him the scar, and said she had been that officer's daughter. It was the coolest coincidence. Story 39. When I was 18, I dated a girl who attended a private school. She told me they were having a dance, so I thought it would be a nice night. She said only boys from a specific boys' private school were allowed to come because of an incident when they had previously let everyone in. A girl got very drunk and vomited on the headmaster's shoes, so they restricted attendance to one boys' school after that. 12 years later, I was with my fiancée, a different woman, at a wedding shower. I overheard her say she had been so embarrassed when she vomited on the headmaster's shoes. I yelled, "That was you? That's awesome. I love you even more now that you're famous." Summary. My wife blocked my advances 12 years before we met. Story 40. In freshman physics, I became friends with the Japanese student next to me. After a while, he helped me with my Japanese homework, and I did really well after that, by the way. After that class, we drifted apart. 2 years later, I was an exchange student in Japan for the summer and was sightseeing in Kyoto after the program. I was crossing the street when I heard my name called. I looked around and there he was. Thousands of miles apart, we had met again. We had drinks and good food together. It was a blast. No, his hometown was not Kyoto. He was also sightseeing while home for the summer. I received my first award. Thank you, kind internet stranger. Story 41. My friend's grandfather and my grandfather were friends during the Vietnam War. They recognized each other at my high school graduation. They attended the same school, and now their grandchildren attend the same school. Story 42. I had recently graduated from a large state school and rented a room in an empty house. Since I was moving from my college apartment, I did not have furniture. So I took a dresser a previous occupant had left in the basement. It was not anything fancy, but it was not a basic mass-produced IKEA dresser either. It was a bit older, but not an antique. 3 friends helped me move it upstairs while we waited for a fourth. When the fourth friend arrived, she walked into my room, stared at the dresser for a long time and said, "Why do you have my dresser?" It turned out her parents had donated her childhood dresser to Goodwill, and the previous occupant of the house, who was from the same small town as she was, had bought his dresser there. Story 43. My partner and I were looking for a car. We wanted a Subaru Impreza and found one in our price range on our street that had my 3-letter initials on the license plate. The seller was my partner's high school friend. Story 44. When I was at university in Toronto, I was flying to England for a debating tournament. I booked my flight and told my partner the date and time so he could book his flight as well. The day before we left, we agreed to meet at a particular subway station and ride to the end of the line to catch the bus to the airport. The next day, I went to the subway station at the agreed time, but he did not show up. This was before cell phones, so I could not call him. Eventually, I had to go, so I took the subway and bus, arrived at the airport, and went to the gate. There was no sign of him. I had him paged over the loudspeaker with no result. I told the gate agent, who checked the passenger list. He was not on it. Confused, I flew to London. I found him the next day in London. It turned out that while I was on one level of the subway station waiting to travel north to catch a bus to Terminal 1, he was on the other level waiting to travel west to catch a bus to Terminal 2. His flight was at exactly the same time on the same day, but with a different airline. At every step, we had been describing identical routes, but they never overlapped. Story 45. My dad passed away last summer. While I was making calls to tell the rest of the family, I found the number of one of my dad's childhood friends. whom he had kept in contact with over the years. The number must have been old and disconnected because I could not reach him. I was severely disappointed that my dad's best friend, and probably one of his only friends, would not be able to make it to the funeral. I tried contacting anyone who might know how to reach him, but had no luck. Days passed and my dad's funeral day arrived. After the service, on the drive from the funeral home to the cemetery, I received a call on my dad's phone. It was his friend calling to say he was coming into the state and was headed to our house for a visit, and he wanted to make sure my father would be available. It absolutely shook me. I told him that he had passed away a few days earlier and had just missed the funeral, and that we were at the cemetery. He met my mother and me a couple of hours later and said his final goodbyes to my father. I will never get over how he happened to be on his way here on the day of my dad's funeral, but I am glad he was able to come and see my father off. Story 46. A classmate sent a fake email that looked legitimate to several classmates, saying we had failed an important exam that could harm our careers. After we panicked, he admitted it was a joke. When the results were released a week later, only one person had failed: the classmate who sent the fake email. Story 47. I asked my husband to accompany me to the parking garage to get something from our car. He was already in his pajama pants and did not want to go, but I convinced him no one would see us, and he reluctantly agreed. We got on the elevator and rode down one floor before it stopped to let someone on. The largest, most muscular man stepped in wearing his own pajama pants. He said nothing but nodded at my husband, then got off on the main floor and disappeared. We have never seen him since. Story 48. I have mentioned this before on Reddit, so I will just copy and paste the story about the shadow penis incident. One night at university, I was fooling around with my then-girlfriend and noticed that the TV's brightness caused our shadows to be cast on the wall behind us. Being 19 and foolish, I took a picture with Snapchat of the shadow my erect penis made and sent it to my best friend. I expected an interesting reaction but was unprepared for what happened next. On Snapchat, you can see when a message is received and when it is opened. While my message was still sending and unopened by him, I received a Snapchat from my best friend. I opened it and lo and behold, he had sent an identical picture of his penis's shadow. Both of our girlfriends were confused, thinking it was an inside joke, when we had never mentioned or sent shadow penis pictures before. Summary: I sent a picture of my penis shadow to my best friend at the exact same time he did. Edit. It's fine, we said no homo. Story 49. I was browsing beauty products I had never heard of on the internet. Suddenly my dad, who was in South Korea at the time, called me on FaceTime from a Laneige store and asked if I wanted the exact product I had been looking at. Story 50. For over a decade, I rarely remembered my dreams. One night, I had a very vivid dream that I was arrested by the police for drug possession and sentenced to prison. The dream was agonizingly paced, unfolding in real time. Days turned into weeks, then months. The pain of losing everything and everyone had pushed me into catatonic despair. Then I suddenly awoke. I instinctively checked my phone and found many missed texts, emails, and calls from a friend who had been arrested that night on drug charges and had been trying to reach me to ask me to bail him out. Story 51. When I was in high school, I saw a classmate in Washington while on vacation. I was not fond of him, so I did not say anything. 2 days later, in Canada, I saw him again. We both live in Florida. Story 52. My favorites occurred during separate canoe trips. The first was during a Labor Day weekend trip up and down the St. Croix River, 2 days paddling upstream and one down, which runs between Wisconsin and Minnesota and eventually joins the Mississippi River. Despite it being a holiday weekend, there was virtually no traffic on the river. We saw only one other boat, and that was on the first day shortly after we left. On the second day out, the weather was quite warm. At one point I said, "Boy, a watermelon sure would be good right about now." My 3 companions told me to be quiet and not even mention it, because we did not have one and were not going to find one in the wilderness. A little while later we spotted a green object floating toward us that turned out to be a watermelon. Years later I was on a river outing with several other people on the Whitewater River in Indiana. I was paddling my kayak and had just told the watermelon story to the people in the canoe next to me. It was a hot summer day, and someone said something like, "Watermelons are fine, but I could really go for a cold beer right now." A few minutes later, we paddled around a bend and saw a cooler sitting on a sandbar. We stopped, opened the cooler, and found that it contained just enough cold beers for each of us to have one. Appalachian trail hikers refer to occurrences like this as trail magic. I guess it happens on rivers too. Story 53. I got a new computer and was scrolling through pictures on the old one with my little brother. I found a picture of two butterflies, a blue one and a yellow one, on a large purple flower. I loved this picture and always thought how lucky I was to get it. The colors were so vivid and the butterflies were too patient to let me get 3 shots before they flew away. My brother was in awe of it and I asked if he really liked it. He pulled out his phone and said that he had taken the photo. Sure enough, he had been to the same park the summer after I took mine. He had the same species of plant and butterflies in about the same area and time of day. What are the chances? This was years ago. I will have to see if he still has his and I will try posting them later. Story 54. The Beagle Story. Living in a small Texas town at the time, we always took in dog rescues to help find homes for them. It got to the point that people would dump dogs in our backyard. One day 4 dogs showed up. 2 puppies, a brindle, and a beagle. We immediately got the puppies adopted because they were young and cute. Fast forward 8 months. We had tried adopting out the male beagle twice. Each time he was returned to us. The brindle was an extremely tragic case. She was the mother and the beagle was the father of the puppies. One Sunday, I decided we needed to stop by the volunteer-run animal shelter down the road from our house. For 3 years, I had driven past this place but never stopped because I knew the owner and did not care for her. That day, I wanted to stop because something about their new cages caught my eye. It was closed anyway, and no one was there. A woman came around the corner and asked if we worked there. I told her no and asked how I could help. She said she was interested in adopting a dog. She had been living in a different town 10 miles away for the last few months and, since she was in town, wanted to check the shelter. Her dog had run away about 10 months earlier. I told her we had 2 available for adoption, a brindle and a beagle. She said the dog that had run away was a beagle. You can guess what happened. Somehow we had ended up with her beagle in our yard. Coincidentally, we met her on a random day at a location I had never stopped at, though I had driven past almost every day. The brindle, it turned out, was the female from next door who would escape with him. Those neighbors had skipped out on their rent shortly before the woman moved and were not nice people. So she took the beagle, her beagle who had been missing for almost a year, home. The final coincidence was that we had named that beagle Bagel. His original name had been Brownie. Food names. Story 55. Summary. I bought secondhand pants about 10,000 kilometers from home that appear to be from my hometown. I went on a 3-week trip through Costa Rica 4 years ago. I needed to buy a new pair of shorts because I had not brought enough. We could not find any regular clothing stores, so we ended up in a shop selling secondhand clothes. They source items from collection points around the world for the less fortunate. We call it humanitas in the Netherlands. There are collection bins all over the country. I bought an ugly pair of cargo shorts. In one of the pockets, I found a 3-year-old festival token from a festival that takes place 20 kilometers from my home. I am sure it was not mine because I never went to that festival. So these pants traveled from my hometown to Costa Rica, only to be flown back with me. Story 56. I was best friends with a girl in preschool. After that, we did not attend the same schools, so we lost touch. Flash forward to my junior year of high school, and I met her again. One day, while walking her home, we passed that preschool and realized we had both gone there and had been friends back then. We have been together for 15 years and will finally get married in October, on our 16th anniversary. Story 57. I was about 3 or 4 years old when my grandfather took me for a walk. Suddenly, I had a very intense feeling of synchronicity. Without thinking, I raised my palm in front of me and, in that instant, bird droppings landed directly on it. The strangest part was that I knew it would happen. I can't really describe it, but it was, strangely, the most perfect moment of my life. By the way, sorry for my English. Edit, wow, my first silver. Thank you. Story 58. I knew a girl in high school who was the worst kind of person. It would take too long to explain all the reasons, but a major one was that she tried to drive a wedge between my best friend and me. She moved away after high school. My friend and I would bring her up occasionally, talk about some of her worst qualities, and say how glad we were that we never had to see her again. Once, while we were doing this in a restaurant, she suddenly appeared right next to our table. She had come back to visit someone and happened to be there as we were discussing her. It was so awkward. It lasted about 5 minutes, and then she left. We just sat there, stunned, thinking, what the heck? Story 59. I met my doppelganger, who lived one street from me. In his room, the same symbol appeared on several drawings and on the leather curing my sister had given me weeks earlier. He grew up in a city neighboring mine and experienced the same mental health issues. Apparently, being too similar is not desirable in a relationship. Story 60. Copied from another thread, but my whole existence is a strange coincidence. I turned 6 on June 6, 2006. I was born at 6:06 in the evening. I am 6 feet tall. Before you ask, no, I do not have 6 fingers on either hand. Story 61. One summer, when it was blazing hot, I was leaving Home Depot and saw a man panhandling at the exit. I gave him an ice-cold bottle of water from my lunch cooler and went to my job. When I arrived, the homeowner said, "It sure is hot today. Would you like a water?" He brought out the exact same kind of bottled water I had just given away. It was ridiculous. Of all the brands of bottled water, it felt like the universe had given my water right back. Story 62. My best friend and I met in college. We clicked right away. At odd times our shared intuition kicks in and we have the same thoughts even when we are across the country or across the pond from each other. The biggest surprise was when we both bought cars and later discovered they were the same model, year, and color. Story 63. A few years ago, I spontaneously decided to go on a solo camping trip to see a blood moon lunar eclipse. I had no camping experience, so deciding to do this was already random. I asked around for good spots, was suggested a small lake in the Adirondacks, and off I went. On the night of the eclipse, I arrived at a nearby bridge well before nightfall to secure a good spot and stayed there the entire night. Many people stayed, and others pulled over briefly to look at the eclipse before continuing on. A couple of months later, I was telling one of my longtime friends, on whom I had always had a crush, about the trip when he came home from college. He paused and said, "I know that bridge, just past the town over the river." It turned out he had happened to be driving through that night and pulled over at the exact same spot on the opposite side of the road. It was crazy. It felt like a fairy tale when we started dating afterward. But then he turned out to be a psycho and the plot point became meaningless. Lame. I forgot to add that the lake was 6 to 7 hours from my hometown, so this was not a nearby outing. Story 64. After leaving the army and starting college, I went to get my college identification picture taken. The school was doing a story on the new identification cards, and 2 days later my identification mugshot was on the bottom of the front page. After 3 years of straight quarters and a couple of major changes, I exhausted my federal educational benefits for veterans and transferred to another school where I had a better chance of finding a job while working. During registration, the new school was doing a story about their new identification cards, and guess whose picture was on the front page of the student paper? My 15 milliseconds of fame was over, but my mother was proud. Story 65. I was at work when my boss's son called and asked if we had an extra Ethernet cable he could have. We did not. An hour later, a customer walked in and asked, "Do you need any Ethernet cables? We have a bunch of extras that we cannot use at work and we will throw them away unless we can find someone to give them to." Edit. I swear I know the difference between son and son. Story 66. I am from Canada. When I was 20, I went to Australia to travel for 6 months. While I was there, I ran into a couple of guys I had gone to college with in the same hostel where I was staying. They did not come with me to the bar that night, but I ended up walking back with 3 other Canadians. While chatting with them, I mentioned the 2 other guys I knew in the hostel by name and said one was named Cyrus. One of the men stopped dead and said, "Cyrus' last name?" It turned out my friend was his childhood best friend, whom he had not seen in 12 years. We went and woke him up at 3 a.m. for a very cool reunion. Story 67. One night in college, I dreamed that my best friend was in trouble and was calling me for help, but I could not reach him in time. The next day, I learned he had been killed by an improvised explosive device in Afghanistan. Story 68. Yesterday, my boyfriend was diagnosed with the same rare health condition I have, which affects between 150,000 and 200,000 Americans. Freaky. Story 69. I have two stories. 20 years ago, my family and I lived in Germany. My parents and sister had lived there for about 12 years before I was born. One day my mother, my sister, and I were walking in an open marketplace when my mother said, "I wonder what happened to Mrs. XYZ, the woman who babysat you when you were a baby." Not 10 minutes later, my mother stopped a random woman in the market and asked, "Excuse me, are you Mrs. XYZ?" It was her. We had not seen her in over a decade, and we found her right after saying her name. The other one happened this week. I am a teacher and usually have music playing in the classroom as students walk in. I had Smooth Criminal by Michael Jackson playing, and a student walked in and said, "Whoa, this is the same song my iPod played as my alarm this morning." Less than a minute later, a different student walked in and said, "Whoa, this is the same song my Sonos played as my alarm this morning." All three of us chose the same song on the same day. Story 70. I was dating a woman who was Jewish. Her family liked to tease me about not being Jewish, so I mentioned an obscure Jewish-sounding surname from my grandmother's side. She and her mother went pale. To summarize, I probably had sex with my cousin. Story 71. When I was a child, someone in my family broke a glass vase on the wooden floor. My mother cleaned it up as best she could, but she asked us to wear shoes in the kitchen for a few days just in case she had missed some and continued sweeping to get the last bits. I was loudly complaining about the injustice of having to wear shoes in my own house when I stepped on that final piece of glass. Story 72. A few years ago, while I was working in a small pub, two tables with two seats each next to each other were finishing at the same time. I brought both checks and each party decided to split the bill. When I tried to close them out, I realized that not only were the amounts split identically down to the cent, but each table had matching sets of cards, at least by the final four digits. That is, the first table had a charge of 28.79 on the card ending in 1000 and another for 28.78 on the card ending in 5008. The second table had identical charges, down to the cent and the last four digits on both cards. I have never gotten over how unrealistically improbable it all was. Story 73. I was on holiday in South Africa and I met someone who lived just around the corner from me in the UK. Another time, I was on a ferry to France and I saw one of my teachers. Story 74. When I started dating my girlfriend, she invited me to her house. It was the first house I had ever lived in. Her grandmother, who lived down the street, was friends with my parents and worked for the doctor who had delivered me. A little while later, we were looking at old family photos and found one of a 4th of July parade in my neighborhood. There was a little boy in the picture whom they did not know, but he looked an awful lot like me. I asked my dad, and he remembered taking us to our old street to watch the parade. When I was a toddler, I had wandered into my future girlfriend's family photograph. Story 75. How I met my husband. You know how they say you won't find someone until you stop looking? On the way to the club with my cousin, I said, "I don't want to look for a guy tonight. I just want to have fun." I had a bout of bad luck in that department. We were dancing and hanging out, then went outside and I stepped out for a smoke. I was talking to a guy friend and looking around when I saw him. He was standing next to a man who I knew was friends with my cousin. I can't explain it, but I suddenly felt I had to go talk to him. I had never gone up to men because I was too shy and had a lot of insecurities. My friend was mid-sentence. I don't think I even looked at him. I said, "Uh-huh, I have to go," and walked over. I said, "Hi, you look bored." At first he gave me a "who is talking to me" kind of look, like I was being annoying. Then he did a double take and the biggest smile lit up his face. The strange part is that he had seen me first. His friend thought he knew me, he did, but not in the way he thought. The whole reason he was outside was to be introduced to me, so it was very surprising when I approached him first. We got together 2 weeks later and have been together ever since. Story 76. I have two stories. First, I met my oldest friend when we were 14. When we were 17, we discovered we had been born 3 hours apart. I thought someone was playing a joke on me, so I demanded to see identification to prove it. Took us 3 years to figure that out. Second, I ran into my cousin at an airport in California. Neither of us was flying home. We had not spoken in weeks, but we had layovers at the same time in terminals that were right next to each other in a different state. It was really strange. We took a picture to prove it. Story 77. I had a dream that my friend and I ran into Biggie Smalls. He was alive in the dream, and he invited us to a party that night. We decided to buy Biggie a gift. I suggested a water dragon, a large lizard, because he would look dope with one on his shoulder. We started walking to the party with the lizard. At the local park, I looked down next to a bench and found a Ziploc bag with white powder. We took the powder and partied with Biggie that night. The next day, I woke up and made coffee. I turned on the radio and Party and Bullshit was playing. I thought it was a strange coincidence, given the dream, but did not think much of it. I walked out and froze. On my porch was a water dragon. A water dragon might appear near my house 2 or 3 times a year. Later that day, I told my friend about the dream and joked that I might find a bag of drugs. Sure enough, when I walked to my friend's house that night and checked the bench, I found a bag exactly where I had dreamed it would be. I disposed of the bag. My friends and I did not use the substance or stay up all night listening to Biggie Smalls songs and having the best time of our lives. Story 78. When I was a kid, we had a plush penguin that played Jingle Bells when you squeezed its stomach. One Christmas it broke and kept playing the song endlessly. This went on for hours. My mother tried stuffing it in the couch cushion, but we could still hear it. Finally, I became so annoyed that I grabbed the penguin and said, "This is annoying. Could you please stop?" It stopped immediately. Story 79. In first grade, my parents sold our house and we moved about an hour away. I said goodbye to my classmates. A month later, the kid I had sat next to at my old school moved in across the street. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.